Finally, we're here. Our first post-ruin mimic theory. Sorry, there's a tear in my eye. It's just finally here. And I'm sure that many of you know by now that Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach Ruin was easily the most hyped up FNAF release over the past couple of years now. Maybe the FNAF movie had more hype in general, but I honestly have never seen pretty much everyone in the community come together like this for once and just say, yeah, that was a good time. I could go on and on about how much I like Ruin, how it fixes so many of Security Breach's problems, and also doesn't, but hey, that's a video for the future. At the moment, I want to try and get major theories out of the way because the theory world moves way faster than the game reviewing one. At the end of the day, no matter what theory I come up with, Ruin's quality will remain objectively the same. But if I waited on posting my theories, then there's a good chance I get beaten to the punch. So let's talk about our good boy, the Mimic. Not to say I told you so, but okay, yeah, I told you so. So many of my more recent theories were proven true in one way or another, many more than I initially thought would. I didn't fully predict Ruin, and some of my theories were blatantly wrong, but the big one that I'm glad I got right was in the inclusion of the Mimic. The Mimic serves as the final boss of Ruin, with a chase scene that has a couple different outcomes based on prior actions you took through the game, or during the chase itself. Having previously been a book-only character, it marks so far the first and only time an animatronic character is migrated from page to screen. I would say character in general, but both William Afton and Henry Emily kinda claim that spot for themselves on differing levels. Anyway, today's theory is all about how we get a Mimic from point A to point B. Just what happened between the end of Security Breach and Ruin. And what else can we solve? Well, how about whether or not you, the person watching, are subscribed to the channel? It really helps me out in the long run, so if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. Let's get this started. So before we can figure out what the Mimic was doing before Ruin, we need to discuss what he was doing before Security Breach. It's a story I'm sure you've heard a million times now, so I'll keep it brief. The Mimic is an animatronic created by Edwin Murray to mimic whatever it sees. Edwin accidentally teaches this animatronic violence in a fit of rage, causing the Mimic to go haywire. It's then brought to the Pizzaplex, where its job is to tear apart endoskeletons and the underground pizzeria, which was in the process of being converted into a museum. The Mimic does this, but then kills most of the construction crew and is then sealed inside. Sometime later, a group of teenagers find themselves trapped inside, and the Mimic begins picking them off one by one, sometimes wearing different mascot costumes, and other times sneaking up on them. The last we've seen of the Mimic in the books, it crawled into a blue dog costume worn by a girl named Kelly, killing her inside the costume and walking away. It's unknown what condition Kelly's body is in, but many people believe that this act of the Mimic climbing inside with her in the costume may result in the body becoming grafted to the robot, making it appear like Burntrap in Security Breach. That's another thing. Although I was cautious to say that the Mimic was Burntrap in my last video, as more evidence mounts, the models are looked over and compared, and the mannerisms are watched and measured, it does still seem very likely that Burntrap is indeed the Mimic. There's still a couple problems with this idea, but we do have one more chapter at the least in Tales from the Pizzaplex, so hopefully more will be revealed there. For the sake of this video, we're going to presume that the two are one and the same. I know I shouldn't do that any longer, but considering that otherwise Burntrap is literally the only major character in Security Breach who does not make an appearance of any kind in Ruin, I think it's fair we play ball in this way. So, what happened? Well, presumably, somehow, the Mimic becomes Burntrap, and then what? Well, it's not quite clear. Looking through the game, it seems that the Princess Quest ending is indeed the canon ending of Security Breach, which then begs the question, what happens to Burntrap? If the Afton ending never happens, then Gregory never starts the fire that burns the Pizzaplex down, and Burntrap never gets taken away by the blob. Well, I think we have an answer for this. Newspapers at the beginning of the game clue us in as to why the Pizzaplex is in such a ruined state. At one point, an earthquake had struck, resulting in much of the destruction we see. While an earthquake might sound lame at first, there's actually a lore reason behind it. When we travel down to the Pizzaplex, we travel through a tunnel labeled the Tangle Tunnel in the game's coding. Oh, by the way, apparently in the code the blob's name is Tangle, which means that somehow the blob tunneled its way out. Knowing that this ground is unstable and built on a sinkhole as we learned in the base game, we can surmise that the earthquake was most likely caused by the blob's tunneling. So, to quickly recap, the Mimic is created and brought to the Pizzaplex. Gregory shows up for his one night at Freddy's, Gregory frees Vanessa and leaves, and then at some point the blob destroys the Pizzaplex via tunneling. But when did this happen? Well, if you ask me, I'd have to say right after Gregory escaped. Maybe not literally the moment after, but definitely soon after. Evidence throughout the game shows us that Gregory and most likely Vanessa actually returned to the Pizzaplex at some point, especially in the room right before you encounter the Mimic. In this room you can find several interesting details, including broken parent nodes like the ones you've been breaking for most of the game, and the Mixus machine that seems to be the origin point of the entity. But despite all that even, we also see a backpack down here, with a label that reads Gregory. We even have an idea of just what happened here, with a handprint in gray dust on the nearby vent, indicating that Gregory may have crawled out of the vent after luring the Mimic into this room and sealing him in with concrete. But how did Gregory even know the Mimic was down there? Well, that's what makes the Vanessa ending so important. The Vanessa ending is special for one particular reason. It's the only ending of Security Breach where Gregory, Freddy, and Vanessa are all saved. It's considered the best possible ending. Having Vanessa saved is what's most important here though, as it's possible that Vanessa tells Gregory that something is in the basement. Maybe not something she's aware of, but something she knows is down there. This is the reason she and Gregory go down there to seal the Mimic in, using a forklift from the nearby Roxy Raceway and several cement bags which were, go figure, also tucked away nearby in the log flume ride. This is how I think the plan went down. But there's one more plot element that we haven't touched on. Why would Cassie go to the Pizzaplex in the first place? Well, simple. Gregory told her to. But why would she so blindly just go, instead of, I don't know, telling someone else, like one of her parents, or Gregory's parents, or someone? Well, it's definitely because Gregory is one of her only real friends, but also because she's probably just excited to find out he's alive. Later on in the game, when you put the mask on, you can see several missing persons posters with Gregory on them, indicating that in the real world, he's still considered a missing child. This is neat on its own, but then I saw this message at the beginning of the game. He was our superstar. When I read this, I had assumed it was in reference to Glamrock Freddy. After all, the Pizzaplex and Freddy were both pretty popular from what we can tell. But one thing to note is that Freddy himself isn't usually referred to as a superstar. That's a nickname he gives other people. So I thought, well, maybe Freddy isn't our superstar. Maybe it's Gregory. Freddy calls Gregory a superstar throughout much of Security Breach, and if his clothing is anything to go off of, or his drawings, or hell, his choice to climb inside Freddy of all characters, Freddy is probably Gregory's favorite animatronic. I think the "he was our superstar" message is a message written in protest. A child has gone missing at the Pizzaplex, and his family and community miss him. After all, he was their superstar. This leaves us with a couple questions. First off, if Gregory is with Vanessa, why is he still considered a missing child? Are the two in hiding? Well, if we know anything about Fazbear Entertainment, they do like to silence people who know a little too much. So it wouldn't surprise me if Vanessa and Gregory simply aren't showing their faces after all the trouble they caused. Second, who created the Mixus program? Was this just a basic function of the Pizzaplex, or did Vanessa and Gregory make it? Well, considering that as GGY, Gregory is known to be able to manipulate computers, it's possible that Gregory reapplied that knowledge to create Mixus and seal the Mimic away by locking all the doors to the Pizzaplex. However, I'm not entirely sure of that. The reason being that it manifests as a rabbit. Why does it do this? And also, it's definitely an outside force to the Vandy mask, which, again, we don't really have an explanation for. We know the Mimic is tapped into this mask, which leads me to believe that it's not a force for good like Mixus is. The most evidence we have tying Gregory to Mixus is that he's at the very least aware of it existing. Which, I mean, considering he left his backpack like a couple feet from the machine labeled Mixus, I would agree that he probably knows it exists. The question I have specifically, though, is what Mixus's purpose actually is. It's implied his job is to keep the security active in the case of an emergency lockdown, but is this just to keep the Mimic in place, or is he just the general security program of the Pizzaplex? Because if he's just the general security, then I don't think Gregory would have made him at all. However, if he's there explicitly to stop the Mimic, then I do think it would have to involve Gregory and Vanessa. And that about wraps it up. So to recap once again, the Mimic is created and brought to the Pizzaplex, where it takes over pretty much everything while its body is trapped in the basement. Then, Security Breach happens. After Gregory frees Vanessa from the Vanny programming, Vanessa informs Gregory that there's still something kicking in the basement, and with the two of them being on the run, they're the only people who know about it. So, they go back to the Pizzaplex and seal the mimic into one room using concrete and a forklift from Roxy Raceway. Doing this may have even triggered the blob to wake up and tunnel out, with the earthquake it causes destroying the Pizzaplex. Workers show up sometime after that and declare the place temporarily closed, and they begin the process of rebuilding. However, this process is either abandoned or a damn lost cause. They're missing Freddy's head, and people are aware of a child named Gregory who went missing inside. So, the place is left on emergency lockdown, which leads us to Cassie receiving a message from her only friend, telling her that he's still alive and kicking in the ruined Pizzaplex, and that he needs her help.
End communication.
So that's just about it. I think that pretty succinctly wraps it up. But believe me, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to ruined content I plan on making. Without spoiling just what's going on, you should know that I have some big plans related to the Blob, and a really fun one in store for Glamrock Bonnie. Until then, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.